Good morning, everyone. Welcome to another amazing topic. Today, I have the pleasure of having Aida Phillips, who we go very far back in the PR world. So welcome, Aida.
Thank you, Gladys. I'm so happy to see you after so many years, but we were always kept in touch. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
No, I'm really happy that you're here. And I wanted to touch base because this week I'm speaking on the difference with the Hispanic community and the culture and tradition. By the way, if anybody wants to hear the conference, it's on BizBash, and you go bizbash.com, you can log in, you can register for free and hear the conference. So I wanted to touch base because you have a multicultural PR. So tell us a little bit about what that is. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I was born in Mexico City, and at a young age, we moved to Texas. So I've lived in Mexico, Texas, and now Florida. And I've worked in PR and advertising for over 20 years, always reaching the Hispanic community in the United States. I graduated from La Universidad de la Comunicación in Mexico City. And I've worked for, like I said, more than 20 years. But everything obviously has changed. Multicultural came about not too long ago, even though when I worked for agencies before, we used to target the Hispanic community. Those that were born in Mexico or in Latin America and lived in the United States, or those that were born in the United States from Latin parents. So first generation, second generation, third generation. So we've always done that type of outreach. The multicultural is basically not only being Hispanic, but being a woman, having a different religion, having a different way of life, if you can say. In the multicultural, you have also LGBTQ, transgender, all of those things come to play when you talk multicultural. It's not just having a different language.
Got it. So let me start by defining. Remember the past time when they used to say, oh, you're Latin or you're Hispanic. And some people literally got offended at being called Latin, or others were offended at being called Hispanic. And so what's your definition for you between Latin and Hispanic? Because each one sees it completely different.
I've always considered myself Latina because I was born in Mexico. And yes, I adopted the customs of the United States. I speak the language, but I've always considered myself Latina.
So, okay, Latina meaning, and I'm going to tell you the exact definition, coming from a Latin country, a Latin American country, while Hispanic actually means coming from a country where Spanish is spoken. So that's the big difference, and a lot of people got offended. So now, today, I'm very happy that they united the whole community in calling it the LatinX.
Yes.
I actually love it because it's one community. But one community speaking Spanish is completely different one from the other.
Correct.
Totally. I want to share a slide, and this is the first time that I've gone to a slide in one of the conversations, but the purpose of today's conversation is so that the people that are in the United States can understand a little more that what goes on beyond just Spanish. So let me share a slide with everyone. And this is a very simple slide that says kids. But let me tell you how kids are called in different countries. Pelados, chicos, chibolos, cabritos, and chavos. Those are literally 5 countries, same definition as kids. And this is where I want to go, because it's completely different on how each of the countries are based on their culture and their traditions.
Correct.
So I want to go through an example. You're from Mexico, I'm from Colombia. We're both in the US. We're both working in the US. We're both now doing this conversation in English as opposed to speaking in our native language, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if I do an event, if I do a corporate event, which is very normal, a breakfast, in Colombia, it is very normal to do an event, a breakfast inviting at 7 a.m. And I know it's on Latin time, the breakfast will start at 7:30, knowing Colombians. What happens if I do that in Mexico?
Don't get ready to start until 9, 10. Yep.
Correct. So the difference, it's not only in time, and I want to stress it out, because we're not talking about a difference that they're going to be late 3 hours. No, it's a difference in culture on when Mexicans have their meals.
Exactly.
So breakfast in Mexico at 9 or 10 a.m., it's very normal. A lunch in Mexico is very normal at 2 or 3 in the afternoon.
Exactly.
While
And dinner at 9 p.m.
Dinner at 9 p.m. While in Spain, it is very normal to have dinner at 10 or 11 p.m.
Exactly.
And Spain is also considered one of the Hispanic countries.
Mm-hmm.
The
Correct.
other part is lunch. In the US, 12 o'clock, lunch is considered very normal. While in Colombia, 1 o'clock is kind of normal. So tell me, give me another example that we can give out differences.
Yes, another example is, let's say you invite somebody for lunch, not so much corporate, but more in the friendliness type of situation. You can invite one person. Let's say I invite you and you're from Mexico, and you'll show up with 2 or 3 people.
Without even telling.
Without even telling me. Yes.
Correct. Another example is on the social scene. There is no RSVP.
No.
And that is literally cultural. People don't respond. So now we've gotten used to the fact of literally, when you're dealing with the Hispanic culture, calling every single person to make sure if they're coming or not. Because from the planning side of it, it's a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, they don't have RSVP +1 or +2. So
they just show up.
They just show up, not even thinking that behind the whole scene, there is a whole planning behind it. So let me tell you a lot of the other differences. Time.
Huh.
The Latin people are, it's always known as, oh, you're on Latin time. Yes, but no. Colombians may be half an hour late, but Venezuelans are 2 hours late. And I've had to do 2 sets of invitations when having Venezuelans with a totally different time, because if not, they will not show up.
On time. Yes, exactly.
So it's basically getting to know the culture.
And of course, you know, I wanted to emphasize that not everyone, obviously not everyone does this, but like, for instance, my parents were always and have always been on time. So I'm very punctual to everything. So when people meet me and they say, you're Mexican, you're here on time, you're 5 minutes before you're supposed to be here.
It's a shock.
It's a shock.
Yeah, it's a total shock. But I think it's also because we've been raised here and working here and have adapted to the culture. And
yeah, somewhat. Mm-hmm.
And this is what I want to emphasize, that not all the Hispanic or the Latinx community is the same. We need to understand their ways of thinking.
Yes.
So how do you reach out? How do you do the PR when it's in a general context? Like, okay, you're talking about multicultural, but for example, let's take a brand of cars. How do you reach out the Hispanic without or going above and beyond the whole community?
So how we reach out, how I reach out to, you know, the Hispanic community, it's not always in language, in Spanish. It's reaching out to those that are from Hispanic or Latin backgrounds, that they have an audience that speaks the language, basically. So in terms of creating an event with influencers, we invite, you know, Luciana Perez, because she's Latin, but her communication's in English, but she's considered a multicultural influencer in our eyes because of her reach. I don't know if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. But for example, for those who do not know her in certain countries, what happens there? You're talking in a general context, right?
Right. It's a general context. Yes.
It's a general context, but when you have to subdivide it, for example, do you really reach out to the Argentinians in the way they're
No, it's
dishes?
different. Right. No, it's different. I haven't had to divide it up, to tell you the truth. We're talking candidly. I haven't, except like when it comes to the Mexican soccer team, then we reach out to only Mexicans. But if it's in a context where it's just a car reveal, we invite everyone who's multicultural. It could be, like I said, LGBTQ, African-American, Latinx, or women actually is considered to be multicultural.
Correct, but the message is completely different.
We use one message now. It's in terms of timing and being productive, we use one message, but they know that we're the multicultural agency that reaches out to them.
Okay, so that's interesting that you guys as an agency use just one message as opposed to using a very dedicated message to each of the countries.
Exactly, yes.
Because for example, it's very different. Like I said, kids. In Colombia, we say pelados.
In Mexico, we say niños.
Niños. Or
Chamacos.
Yeah, and in Venezuela, they say chavos.
Chavos. Mm-hmm.
So if you're gonna say chavos to somebody that doesn't even understand what chavos is, the message has to be very, very clear.
Right, absolutely.
And you're talking on a very universal.
Mm-hmm. So for instance, when I do the Spanish outreach or posts in social media, we do very neutral.
Right.
It's like the telenovelas or the soap operas in the United States, they use the neutral, which is really the Mexican. Because
Not really, because the telenovelas from Colombia are amazing.
Well, no, I know, that's for sure. But here in the United States, You're right. But here in the United States, I know that, for instance, if it's in Los Angeles, it's going to be very Mexican. If it's in Miami, it's going to be very Cuban, Venezuelan, Colombian. So it just depends. We just try to be more productive and have everything as one, basically.
Talk to me about the different generations, because the first generation that got here was a generation that didn't speak English.
Mm-hmm.
And the second generation is a generation that has been brought up in the US speaking English.
And very acculturated.
Correct. Very acculturated that don't even want to speak Spanish anymore.
Exactly. Yes. I think
So,
I think that back in like the 80s, when I got to the United States, my parents said, there's no way you're speaking Spanish. And I'm so glad, because now, you know, I speak it, but a lot of my friends in my generation don't speak the language, don't speak English. I mean, sorry, Spanish. They don't speak Spanish. They only speak English and they understand Spanish. But I think it's more of it is a cultural thing, depending on where you're at.
but also depending on the generation.
And the generational, yes.
Because the original generation, especially in Texas, especially the Mexican community that came in, the kids don't even want to be related or even thought of being Hispanic.
Hispanic, yes.
Why?
I think it's to fit in. They acculturate to fit in, and they were embarrassed. A lot of them are embarrassed to speak Spanish because of the racism that was created, to tell you the truth. That's what I'm thinking. I mean, it would be great to have.
You may be right that it has to do with a lot of racism that went towards the Spanish speaking.
Yes.
And I know that now it's getting even more, getting even more out there, that it's becoming even a bigger division.
There is, yes. I mean, you hear it in the news saying, you know, these people were listening to Spanish music and people came and made a ruckus about it, and I don't think it's not being proud of who they are, it's just being embarrassed and being pointed at.
But you said something very interesting. It's trying to fit in.
It's trying to fit in, absolutely.
So this is a generation, and now the third generation don't even speak Spanish.
No.
But that's sad. So how are we going to communicate? What can we do to get the culture and not forget about the cultural backgrounds, the traditions? How do we do that?
That's a very good question. I wish I had the answer to it, but I'm thinking that you can't make somebody do something they don't want to. But I think it's important to explain to them why using, you know, their ancestors' language is important to keep it going.
Okay. With the census now that came out, there is a majority of Hispanics now in the United States. Hispanics, considering that you have something related to the Latin or Hispanic culture.
Okay.
But if the third generation are losing that culture, how do we bring it back? How do we educate them in getting back to our roots so that that part is not forgotten? And now it's 63%.
I think that social media nowadays plays a big part in the wanting to fit in to culture. And maybe it is a social media campaign. I don't know. It's something
What's
massive.
the difference in social media between the Latin reach and an American reach?
There's a huge difference.
Okay, talk to me about that. In the reach out influencers. The only thing I see is that if you go to social media and you see a lot of the Latin women, there's a lot of tits,
Skin.
skin.
There's a lot of skin, yes. I think, personally, I think, like, I go to TikTok and look for Spanish speaking TikTokers because I identify with them, especially my age. I'm 50. So I like to go in. I don't follow the little kids that are doing it. I follow like the older generation that are speaking Spanish on TikTok, and TikTok is huge for Spanish speakers. But how do you do it? I don't know. I think it's something that we need to think about because it is sad. Like, for instance, my daughter, who's 10, her first language is Spanish. As soon as she got to school,
That's it.
she did not want to speak Spanish. And my mom speaks to her in Spanish, but she understands it, but she doesn't want to
But she
speak
doesn't reply in Spanish.
in Spanish.
That is exactly what's happening with the next generation of kids.
Yes.
They don't want to speak.
And coming from her, she's very mature and she'll tell me, Mommy, I don't feel comfortable because I feel like I'm mispronouncing. And I'm embarrassed to speak Spanish.
But what happens, for example, in my case, that I do events in Latin America, and you need people that actually are fluent in Spanish. And we're going to have this huge gap.
Right.
Of the next generation. I can't even find an intern that can write in Spanish.
That's another thing. One thing is to speak it, and another thing is to write it.
To write it.
And to understand. Yeah, it's difficult. What do you know? What do you think you're gonna do? We can do? Because
education, like doing a campaign that speaking Spanish is not a bad thing, that this is our culture. The same as in Europe. In Europe, you go and the taxi drivers speak 5 languages.
Yes, I know.
Each one respects the language, but they respect the language from the whole country. So there's people that in the grocery store can speak 5 languages. And here we're just discussing that we're losing the Spanish language because they want to fit in.
Yes.
I'm going to tell you what Costa Rica did. And Mexico also did it very good. They put a lot of money in educating their it's not first responders because it used to be first responders in the sense of the tourism. It was the first people that you meet when you landed in Mexico or in Costa Rica.
Mm-hmm.
They were trained by the government to speak English. So you land in Mexico and you get taxi drivers, you get immigration officers that actually welcome you in English.
Right. Yes.
And that is why Mexico and Costa Rica are leading. Well, I'm talking pre-COVID, pre-pandemic era.
Yes.
But for example, in other countries, like for example, you get to Colombia, the taxi driver has no clue on any other language. And here, it's the same, but the other way around.
There's only English, right?
There's only English. And instead of saying, look, we want the tourists, we want everybody to come. Let's concentrate on welcoming the people and acknowledging that they do not speak English. Let's welcome them in Spanish.
Right.
And that's the part that we need to overcome, the education part.
You're right.
And we
Absolutely.
need to respect that there's another language, and so what? We can speak 5 languages. I wish I could.
I wish I could too. The thing too, in the United States, I feel like, especially in some areas of the United States, if you speak another language, they judge you. So it's overcoming that judgment of speaking a different language. On the contrary, it's a blessing to speak 2 languages or 3.
For example, the other day, a friend of mine was in the line at a store, and I ran into her, and she was in the line, and she greeted me in Spanish. We're both from Colombia. Hi, how are you? Of course, the hug and kisses. This was before pandemic, the hug and kisses, and a lady behind it was furious. She started screaming at us to go back to her country.
Oh, yes.
She was furious. And I am American. I became an American citizen. She also became an American citizen. But that doesn't mean that you forget your language. And it was so offensive that we got into such a discussion that the manager had to be called in. The lady was so rude, and she started to become violent.
And that's the thing, that I feel people think that they own this country and they can say whatever. We need more empathy in all aspects of life. If you're talking Spanish, talk Spanish. Speak whatever you
I
want.
just remember that, go back to where our family came from. My family came from Poland and Romania and went to Colombia with no language.
Yes, exactly.
And they were taken in. And they opened businesses, they opened factories. There's a lot of studies on how immigrants help to get the country to where it is.
Exactly. My grandparents came from Russia, Lithuania, and Poland too, and they did not speak 1 word of Spanish in Mexico. They went to Mexico. And I was thinking the other day, wow, my grandparents immigrated to Mexico, and then I immigrated to the United States. That is super cool. Not everyone can say that.
No, I get it, but you had to overcome the culture and the language. And I imagine that your daughter has enchiladas.
Oh yeah.
And that she loves it. And when your family comes from Mexico, or when you invite other people, you give them those traditions back.
Absolutely. And not only the Mexican traditions, but the Jewish traditions is important to me.
Correct.
So I'm very multicultural.
I remember when my kids from college came home, and I asked them, what do you want to eat? And the first thing was like your favorite food. So that is part of the tradition that cannot go away.
Exactly.
And by educating the next generation that your tradition, your culture is worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can fit in by becoming even more educated.
Of course.
That's
Absolutely.
the way that we can do it. And Aida, with that, I think we can talk about the Spanish. I can show you a million slides on the whole difference in culture. But bottom line for everyone is, if you're speaking Spanish, be proud of your culture, be proud of where you come from, and just teach the next generation to also be proud and continue, because we can grow this country in a very educated and being inclusive with everyone.
Exactly.
Because that's what it's all about. So thank you, Aida.
Thank you, Gladys.
Everybody stay safe above all, and I'll see you next week. Have a great day.
You too.